The mill wheel had not turned properly in 3 months, but Aidan Sinclair still set out 20 plates for the harvest gathering because loneliness, he had learned in the 2 years since Margaret died, was far worse than burnt bread. The bread was indeed burnt. The stew had somehow managed to be simultaneously watery and scorched at the bottom, an achievement that would have been impressive if it were not so profoundly unappetizing. The roasted vegetables had the texture of leather, and the gravy possessed a grayish hue that suggested it had given up on life sometime during the cooking process. Aidan surveyed his table with the cheerful resignation of a man who had long ago accepted his limitations in the kitchen, his broad shoulders shaking with silent laughter at his own expense as his neighbors filed in with the cautious expressions of people entering a building that might collapse. They came anyway, because he was well liked, because his mill had been the valley's backbone for a generation before his father died and left it to him, because Margaret had been beloved, and they pitied him still. They came with covered dishes of their own, diplomatically placed alongside his offerings, and they ate with forced enthusiasm while complimenting the effort. Certainly there had been effort. "Aidan, this bread has real character," old Thomas Harrow offered, sawing at his slice with determination. "It does," Aidan agreed warmly, his gray eyes crinkling at the corners. "Unfortunately, that character is primarily charcoal." He was 42, tall without being remarkable, broad from years of hauling grain sacks, with brown hair going silver at the temples and hands that bore the permanent dust of flour no amount of washing could eliminate. His smile came easily, perhaps too easily for a man whose ledgers told a story of slow ruin. The conversation flowed around him like water around a stone, warm and familiar. The Hendersons were expecting their 4th child. Young Peter Moss had finally proposed to the blacksmith's daughter. The autumn wheat had come in heavy and golden, the best harvest in 5 years, which meant everyone would need their grain ground soon, which meant Aidan would need his millstones working properly, which meant he would need to pay the debt he owed to Marcus Fell, the traveling stone cutter who had repaired them last spring and who had not yet returned for his payment despite 3 increasingly threatening letters. Aidan ladled more gray stew onto plates and did not think about the ledger hidden in his desk drawer, the one that showed exactly how many coins he had left and how many he owed, the arithmetic that refused to balance no matter how he rearranged it. The door opened without a knock midway through the meal, and a figure filled the frame with the casual confidence of someone who had never questioned their right to enter any space they chose. She was Orc, unmistakably, with skin the color of spring moss after rain and small tusks that curved just slightly over her lower lip. Her ears rose to gentle points through dark hair, braided pragmatically back from her face, and she wore the leather apron and tool belt of a tradeswoman over travel-stained clothes that spoke of weeks on the road. She was not tall, perhaps 5.5 feet, with the lean muscle of someone who spent their days swinging hammers rather than the hulking build of tavern tales. She was younger than Aidan by a decade at least, with sharp, intelligent eyes that swept the room with frank assessment. The conversation died like a candle in wind. "I was told there was food," she said, her voice low and direct, addressing the room at large with no apparent concern for the sudden tension that had frozen 20 humans mid-chew. "I have been walking since dawn and the inn charges twice what the meal is worth." Aidan felt the weight of his neighbor's stares, felt them waiting to see what he would do, whether he would turn her away or welcome her, whether his good nature extended to orcs at his table. He felt the familiar anger at being tested, the exhaustion of being always the one expected to prove his virtue. And then he let it go because anger solved nothing and he had invited the valley to dinner. And the valley apparently now included an orc woman who looked hungry and tired and profoundly uninterested in whether her presence made anyone uncomfortable. "There is always room for one more," he said, rising to fetch another plate, his tone as warm as it had been for Thomas Harrow, because he meant it, and because life had taught him that kindness cost nothing he could not afford to spend. "Though I should warn you, I am a terrible cook." "I have eaten trail rations for 16 days, she replied, moving to the one empty chair at the table's end without waiting for further invitation. "I doubt you can be worse than dried meat and stale oats." She was wrong. Aidan watched with growing mortification as she took her first spoonful of stew, her expression shifting through a remarkable range of emotions in the span of 3 seconds. Surprise, confusion, something that might have been betrayal, and finally a kind of resigned horror. She set down her spoon with the deliberate care of someone exercising tremendous self-control. The room held its collective breath. "This is terrible," she said flatly, turning to look directly at Aidan with eyes the color of amber in sunlight. "Your cooking is terrible." Someone gasped. Thomas made a choking sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Aidan felt his own smile widening despite himself, relief flooding through him that someone had finally said it, that he was released from the pretense of not knowing what everyone was too polite to speak aloud. "I know," he said simply, and meant it. She stood, untying her tool belt and setting it aside with brisk efficiency, rolling up her sleeves as she surveyed the kitchen beyond the main room with the air of a general planning a campaign. "So I am staying," she announced, as though this followed logically from the terrible stew, which perhaps it did in whatever calculus governed her thoughts. "To fix it." "Staying," Aidan repeated, not quite catching her meaning. "Your cooking. I am staying to fix your cooking." She moved past him into the kitchen proper, opening cupboards and peering into his stores with the frank curiosity of someone who had decided his space was now partially hers. "You have flour, good. Dried herbs, acceptable. Is that grease or lard?" "I am not entirely sure," Aidan admitted, following her into the kitchen that had been Margaret's domain and his disaster for 2 years running. His neighbors were beginning to murmur, a rising tide of confusion and concern, but he waved them off with a gesture that said he would handle this, though he had no idea how to handle this or what this even was. "It is lard," she decided, sniffing the jar with professional certainty. "Old but not rancid. You do not cook often." "I cook every day," he protested mildly. "No." She turned to face him, leaning back against his work table with her arms crossed. "You burn food every day. That is not the same as cooking. Cooking requires attention, technique, respect for the ingredients. You are just applying heat and hoping for the best." It was the most accurate assessment of his kitchen skills anyone had ever offered, and Aidan found himself laughing, deep and genuine, the sound surprising him with its brightness. "That is exactly what I am doing." Her expression shifted slightly, something that might have been approval or might have been satisfaction at being proven correct. "I am Kara Vorden. I travel the border valleys repairing millstones. Your wheel is grinding poorly. I heard it from the road. Your stones need dressing, possibly replacing." "Aidan Sinclair," he replied, offering his hand automatically, then wondering if orcs shook hands if he had committed some cultural error, but she gripped his palm with firm, calloused fingers and shook once, businesslike. "The stones were repaired in spring." "Badly, then." She released his hand and moved back toward the dining room, where his neighbors were beginning to gather their belongings with the hasty excuses of people who suddenly remembered they had urgent business elsewhere. The presence of an orc in the house. particularly an orc woman who had commandeered the kitchen and showed no signs of leaving, had apparently overcome the valley's affection for Aidan's hospitality. He should have felt anger at their departure, at their fear and prejudice, but he had spent his store of anger long ago and had none left for other people's failures. They filed out with apologetic murmurs and backwards glances, until only Thomas remained, his weathered face creased with concern. "Aidan, are you certain about this?" "I am not certain about anything, Thomas," Aidan replied honestly, because he never had been, not since Margaret died and left him alone with a failing mill and a talent for burning water. "But she says she can fix my cooking and my millstones, and God knows both need fixing." Thomas departed with a final worried look, and then Aidan was alone in his house with an orc woman who had begun scraping his burnt stew into the waste bucket with efficient disgust. "Your guests left," Kara observed without looking up. "They did," Aidan agreed, beginning to stack plates for washing, "because I am orc, likely. Does that trouble you?" He considered the question while carrying dishes to the kitchen basin, studying the back of her head, the careful braids and the set of her shoulders that suggested she expected trouble and was prepared for it. "It troubles me that good people let fear make them small," he said finally. "But I cannot fix other people any more than I can fix my cooking, so I will not waste energy trying." She glanced back at him, her amber eyes searching his face for something, insincerity perhaps, or hidden malice. Whatever she sought, she apparently did not find it, because she nodded once and returned to her examination of his kitchen disaster. "I will need somewhere to sleep," she said, "and payment in coin or trade for the stonework. The cooking instruction I will provide free of charge, as I cannot in good conscience allow anyone to continue producing food this terrible." Aidan laughed again, surprised at how easy it came, how light he felt despite the absurdity of his situation. A stranger had moved into his kitchen. An orc stranger. A stranger who apparently would not take no for an answer. Not that he had offered no. Not that he wanted to offer no, because the house had been so very quiet for so long, and her presence filled it with a strange, comfortable energy he had not realized he had been missing. "I have a spare room," he said. "It was my daughter's before she married and moved to the southern valleys, and as for payment, we can discuss terms once you have examined the stones and determined what work they need." This was a lie, or at least a misdirection, because he knew exactly what payment she would require, and he knew exactly how many coins he had in his locked box, and the number would not cover it, not with Marcus Fell's debt hanging over him like a storm cloud. But that was a problem for tomorrow, and he had become very skilled at deferring tomorrow's problems, pushing them further and further into the future where perhaps they would solve themselves, or perhaps the mill would simply fail, and the decision would be taken from his hands entirely. Kara was watching him with an expression he could not read, something thoughtful and measuring, and he wondered what she saw when she looked at him, whether she saw the fear and desperation he worked so hard to bury under good humor and easy smiles. "You are not what I expected," she said finally. "What did you expect? Hostility, suspicion, the usual human welcome for orcs in the borderlands." She wiped her hands on a cloth and faced him fully, leaning back against his work table. "You fed me at your table without hesitation. You did not ask me to leave when your neighbors grew uncomfortable. You are either very brave or very foolish." "I am neither," Aidan replied, beginning to wash dishes in the basin, the warm water soothing on his flour-dusted hands. "I am just tired of being afraid of things that might happen when there are so many real things happening that already require my attention." She made a small sound that might have been agreement or approval, then moved to help him with the dishes, despite his protest that she was a guest. They worked in comfortable silence, passing plates and bowls between them, and Aidan found himself studying her in sidelong glances, noting the careful economy of her movements, the way her hands knew exactly how to hold things to clean them efficiently. She had clearly spent time in kitchens, real kitchens where food was prepared with skill rather than hopeful violence. "Where did you learn to cook?" he asked. "My mother ran an inn on the northern border. I grew up in the kitchen, learning to feed travelers who were hungry and tired and did not care that their meal was prepared by orc hands as long as it was hot and good." Her voice carried no particular emotion, just statement of fact. "She taught me that cooking is an act of care, that feeding someone well is a form of respect. You are disrespecting your ingredients, Aidan Sinclair." "I am," he agreed solemnly. "I deeply apologize to all vegetables I have harmed in the making of my terrible meals." She made a sound that might have been a laugh, quickly suppressed, and he counted it as a victory. They finished the dishes as the sun set beyond the western hills, painting the kitchen in shades of amber and rose. Aidan lit lamps against the gathering dark and showed Kara to the spare room, which was clean but sparse, furnished with a narrow bed and a chest and little else. His daughter Lily had taken most of her belongings when she married, leaving only the furniture and the faded curtains Margaret had sewn a lifetime ago. "It is not much," he said, suddenly aware of the room's plainness, the way the floorboards creaked and the window did not quite seal against the autumn chill. "It is more than a roadside camp," Kara replied, setting her pack on the chest with a sigh that spoke of deep exhaustion. "And it is dry and has a door that locks. That is luxury enough." Aidan left her to settle in and returned to the kitchen, where he sat at his table in the lamplight and allowed himself, just for a moment, to feel the full weight of his circumstances. The mill was dying. Marcus Fell would return for his money, and when Aidan could not pay, he would take the mill in settlement, because that was how debts worked, and Aidan had signed the papers with full knowledge of the consequences. He had gambled that new stones would bring back enough custom to pay off the loan, and he had lost that gamble when the stones Marcus cut proved barely better than the old ones. Adequate but not exceptional. Not enough to draw millers back from Thornton's operation 15 miles west where the quality was superior and the price competitive. He had perhaps 3 months before Marcus returned. 3 months to produce a miracle or lose everything his father and grandfather had built. The door creaked, and Kara appeared in the kitchen doorway, her hair loose now from its braids, falling in dark waves around her shoulders. She had changed into a simple shirt and trousers, her feet bare against the floorboards, and she looked younger in the lamplight, less like a road-hardened craftswoman and more like someone who might laugh easily if given reason. "You are still awake," she observed. "I am often awake late," Aidan replied, which was true because sleep had become difficult after Margaret died, the bed too large and too quiet, his thoughts too loud, thinking about the mill. It was not a question, but he answered anyway. "Thinking about many things. The mill is one of them." She pulled out the chair across from him and sat without invitation, folding her hands on the table between them. "Tell me about the stones. Who cut them? What problems are you having?" He should have deflected, should have kept his troubles private as he had for months, but there was something in her directness that invited honesty, a sense that she would know if he lied and would judge him more harshly for the attempt than for the truth. "A man named Marcus Fell," Aidan said. "He came through in spring, offered to dress the stones at a price I could afford with payment deferred until after harvest. The work was adequate but not exceptional, and the mill has not regained the custom it was losing. The grain comes out inconsistent, sometimes too coarse, sometimes with stone dust in it. People take their wheat to Thornton now, and I cannot blame them. Kara's expression darkened. Marcus Fell is a fraud and a cheat. He undercuts skilled stone cutters by doing fast, cheap work that fails within a season. And he charges interest on deferred payment, does he not? Aidan nodded slowly. 20% compounding monthly, which means you now owe him substantially more than the original price. Yes. She leaned back in her chair, her amber eyes reflecting lamplight like a cat's. And you have no way to pay. Not in coin, Aidan admitted, the words tasting like defeat. I have been hoping he would accept trade labor, something other than the sum he is owed. But men like Marcus Fell do not build their wealth by accepting anything other than what is written in the contract. Men like Marcus Fell build their wealth by taking mills from desperate widowers, Kara said flatly. He has done this before in 3 valleys I know of. He will return with hired muscle, claim you defaulted, and take everything. The confirmation of his fears should have devastated him, but Aidan found he had no devastation left, only a tired acceptance that the world worked as it worked, and he had made his choices and would live with the consequences. Then I will lose the mill, he said simply. I will find other work. I am strong enough for labor, and there is always need for hands willing to work hard. You would surrender it without fighting. I would surrender it without violence, Aidan corrected gently. Fighting suggests I have weapons I do not possess. I signed a contract I cannot fulfill. That is my failure, not Marcus Fell's villainy. I will not compound my mistakes by making things worse. Kara stared at him with an expression caught between frustration and something that might have been respect. You are a strange man, Aidan Sinclair, so I have been told. He offered a tired smile. But I learned long ago that being strange is preferable to being cruel, and I have seen what happens when desperate men lash out at the world. My father nearly lost this mill in a fight over a bad debt when I was young. He won the fight and kept the mill, but the man he fought died of his injuries, and my father spent the rest of his life carrying that weight. I will not kill a man to keep stones and timber. She was quiet for a long moment, her fingers drumming against the table in a soft rhythm that might have been thought or might have been habit. What if I could fix your stones? She said finally. Not just repair them, but properly dress them, sharpen them, balance them so they grind finer and more consistent than any other mill in the valley. What if I could give you product that would bring back your custom through quality rather than price? Hope was a dangerous thing, and Aidan had learned to mistrust it, but it flickered in his chest anyway, small and stubborn. That would solve half my problems, he said carefully, but I still could not pay you for the work, and I will not accept charity. It would not be charity. She leaned forward, her eyes intent. You need skilled stonework. I need somewhere to stay through the winter, somewhere warm and dry with regular meals. We can trade. I fix your mill, you provide room and board. The cooking lessons are included, because I refuse to eat your terrible food for 3 months. It was generous, too generous, and Aidan's instinct was to refuse because he could not bear the thought of someone else shouldering his burdens. But the mill wheel in his mind was already turning, calculating possibilities. If the stones were truly superior, if the word spread through the valley that Sinclair's mill was producing the finest flour in 3 counties, if the custom returned and stayed, then perhaps he could scrape together enough coin to pay off Marcus Fell's blood money debt before the man returned in winter to collect. It would be months of work, he said, testing the idea, looking for the flaw in the arrangement. Stone cutting is skilled labor worth far more than a room and meals. Stone cutting is seasonal work, Kara countered. Winter is coming, and I have nowhere to be until spring. I can sleep in barns and eat cold rations, or I can sleep in a real bed and eat hot food while practicing my craft. This benefits us both." She was lying, or at least not telling the full truth, because no skilled craftswoman would trade months of expert labor for simple room and board unless she had other reasons for staying, reasons she was not sharing. But Aidan had his own secrets, his own hidden ledgers and desperate calculations, and he was in no position to demand complete honesty when he could not offer it himself. "Then we have an agreement," he said, offering his hand across the table, and she gripped it with the same firm confidence as before, sealing a bargain that would either save them both or bind them together in mutual ruin. That night, Aidan lay in his too large bed and listened to the house settling around him, the familiar creaks and whispers of timber and stone joined now by the soft sound of someone else breathing in the room down the hall. It had been so long since another person slept under his roof, so long since the house felt alive with presence rather than haunted by absence. He knew he should be wary, should question Kara's motives and guard his resources more carefully, but wariness was exhausting, and he was so very tired of being alone with his failures. Margaret would have liked her, he thought. Margaret, who had never met a stranger she could not befriend, who had fed half the valley from her kitchen, and never asked for anything in return but good company and honest conversation. She would have approved of Aidan taking in a woman who needed shelter, would have laughed at the idea of an orc teaching him to cook, would have told him to stop being such a careful miser with his trust, and let people help when help was offered. He fell asleep thinking of his wife's laugh and woke to the smell of bread baking, rich and yeasty and so achingly familiar. It brought tears to his eyes before he remembered that he had not baked bread, could not bake bread, and therefore someone else must be using his oven. Aidan dressed quickly and descended to find his kitchen transformed into a workspace of purposeful chaos. Flour dusted every surface, bowls and utensils arranged with military precision, and Kara stood at the work table kneading dough with the steady, rhythmic pressure of someone who had performed the motion 10,000 times and would perform it 10,000 more. She looked up at his entrance, her face flushed from the oven's heat, and gestured to the kettle on the stove. "Tea is ready. Real tea, not the burned leaf water you were making." Aidan poured himself a cup and discovered she was correct. The tea was perfect, strong and fragrant and exactly the right temperature. He sat at his table and watched her work, noting the confidence in her movements, the way her hands shaped the dough with gentle authority, and felt something settle in his chest that had been restless for 2 years. "Your first lesson," Kara announced, shaping the dough into neat loaves and setting them aside to rise. "Heat control. Cooking is not about applying maximum fire to food. It is about applying the right amount of fire to the right food for the right duration. You burn everything because you use the same high heat for bread as you do for searing meat." "I did not know there were different heats," Aidan admitted. She looked at him as though he had confessed to not knowing the sky was blue, but without judgment, just assessment of the teaching challenge ahead. "We will start with basics. By the time I am finished with your stones, you will be able to cook a proper meal without destroying it." They worked through the morning, Kara demonstrating techniques while bread baked and tea steeped, and Aidan absorbed information with the focused attention of a man who had finally found someone willing to teach him rather than simply accepting his failures as inevitable. She taught him about hot spots in the oven, about testing temperature with hand height above the coals, about the difference between a rolling boil and a simmer. "Food has requirements," she explained, chopping vegetables with swift, precise cuts. "Meat requires high heat to seal the surface, then lower heat to cook through. Vegetables require gentler treatment to soften without turning to mush. Bread requires steady, moderate heat to rise properly. You must learn to listen to what the food needs rather than imposing your will upon it. I am imposing my will on vegetables, Aidan repeated, delighted by the phrasing. You are attempting to conquer them through violence, Kara said solemnly. They do not respond well to aggression. He laughed, and she smiled, and the morning passed in a comfortable rhythm of instruction and practice. The bread emerged golden and perfect, the crust cracking with proper texture, the interior soft and warm. Kara tore off a piece and handed it to him, watching his face as he tasted it. It was extraordinary. It was bread as he remembered bread should be, as Margaret had made it before the sickness took her and left him alone with recipes he could not decipher and techniques he could not replicate. "This is how bread should taste," he said quietly. "Yes," Kara agreed. "And you will learn to make it. But first, you must stop trying to burn your kitchen down every time you cook." They ate lunch together at the table, simple fare of bread and cheese and cold meat from Aidan's stores, and then Kara announced it was time to examine the millstones properly. They walked together across the yard to the mill building, a solid structure of stone and timber that had stood for 60 years, and bore the marks of 3 generations of Sinclairs maintaining it with varying degrees of success. The wheel turned sluggishly in the stream's current, grinding nothing because Aidan had stopped it weeks ago, when the stones began producing flour so inconsistent he could not in good conscience sell it. Kara circled the mechanism with the intensity of a physician examining a patient, touching parts, testing alignments, occasionally making small dissatisfied sounds that suggested bad diagnosis. She climbed the ladder to examine the upper stone, running her fingers along its grinding surface with delicate precision, and Aidan watched from below, admiring the competence in her movements, the way she inhabited the space as though she had built it herself. "This is worse than I thought," she called down finally. "Marcus Fell did not dress these stones, he assaulted them. The furrows are too shallow and poorly aligned. The lands are uneven. The balance is off by at least 2 degrees. I am surprised you are getting any consistent flour at all." "I am not," Aidan replied. "That is the problem." She descended the ladder and stood before him, her expression serious. "To fix this properly will require weeks of work. I need to recut every furrow, flatten the lands, reset the balance. Some of the damage cannot be undone. I may need to reface sections completely. And I will need your help because moving stones requires strength I do not have alone." "You have my help," Aidan said immediately. "Whatever you need. I will draw up a plan tonight, calculate measurements and angles. We will start tomorrow at dawn. The sooner we begin, the sooner your mill is producing saleable product again." They walked back to the house through the golden afternoon light, and Aidan felt the first stirring of something he had not felt in months: possibility. Not certainty, not confidence, but the small flame of maybe that kept men moving forward when all logic suggested surrender. Maybe Kara could fix what Marcus Fell had broken. Maybe superior stones would bring back his custom. Maybe he could scrape together enough coin to pay off the debt before winter came and Marcus Fell came with it. Maybe he would not lose everything after all. That evening, Kara taught him to make stew properly, demonstrating the layering of flavors, the timing of ingredient additions, the alchemy of heat and time and seasoning that transformed raw components into something greater than their parts. Aidan followed her instructions with careful attention, and when they sat down to eat, the stew was not merely edible but actually good, rich and savory, and nothing like the gray disaster he had served his neighbors the night before. "I made this," he said wonderingly, staring at his bowl as though it might disappear if he looked away. "You followed instructions," Kara corrected, but her tone was warm, almost fond. "That is the first step toward making it yourself. Eventually, you will understand the principles well enough to improvise, to adapt recipes to what you have available, to create your own dishes. But first, you must master the basics." They ate in comfortable silence, and afterward, Kara spread papers across the table and began sketching diagrams of the millstones, calculating angles and measurements with the absorbed focus of someone solving a complex puzzle. Aidan watched her work, noting the way she chewed her lower lip in concentration, the way her brow furrowed when the numbers did not align as she wanted, and felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the excellent stew. He was attracted to her, he realized with mild surprise. Not just grateful for her help or appreciative of her skill, but genuinely attracted in the way of a man noticing a woman he found compelling. It had been so long since he had felt anything like desire, had considered anyone in a romantic light, that the sensation felt both familiar and foreign, like recalling a language he had once spoken fluently, but had not used in years. Kara looked up and caught him staring, her amber eyes questioning, and Aidan looked away quickly, feeling heat rise in his face like a boy caught admiring his schoolmate. "What?" she asked. "Nothing," he said too quickly. "Just thinking. About the mill," he lied, which was not entirely a lie because he was always thinking about the mill. But in that moment, the mill had been the furthest thing from his mind. She studied him a moment longer, then returned to her diagrams, and Aidan allowed himself to breathe again. He was being foolish. She was here to fix his stones and earn winter shelter, not to be courted by a widower twice her age with more problems than prospects. He would keep his growing feelings to himself, would treat her with the respect and professionalism their arrangement deserved, and would not burden her with emotional complications she had not asked for, and almost certainly did not want. This resolution lasted approximately 3 days. They fell into a routine with the ease of people who understood the value of productive work. Mornings were for cooking lessons, Kara teaching him the foundations of kitchen craft while bread rose and oats simmered. Afternoons and evenings were for stonework, the two of them laboring in the mill with hammer and chisel, Kara demonstrating techniques while Aidan provided the muscle to move the massive stones when adjustments were needed. It was hard work, physically demanding, and they ended each day dusted white with stone powder and aching in muscles neither had known existed. But it was also satisfying in a way Aidan had nearly forgotten work could be, the simple pleasure of making something better, of seeing incremental progress toward a goal that mattered. Kara's skill with stone was extraordinary. She could read the rock like others read books, seeing structure and flaw and potential in surfaces that looked uniform to Aidan's untrained eye. She taught him to see as she saw, to understand that every stone had a grain, a natural alignment that must be respected rather than fought. "Like cooking," she explained, guiding his hand to feel the subtle texture variation across the millstone's surface. "You work with the material's nature, not against it. Force creates resistance. Finesse creates harmony." He learned to trust her judgment, to hold the chisel exactly where she indicated and strike with exactly the force she specified, and slowly, painfully slowly, the stones began to transform under their combined effort. The furrows deepened and aligned. The lands flattened and smoothed. The balance shifted back toward true, degree by painful degree. They talked while they worked, tentative at first, then with increasing comfort. Kara spoke of her childhood in the northern borderlands, of her mother's inn and the travelers who passed through, bringing stories from distant places. She spoke of learning stone cutting from a human master, who had not cared that she was orc, only that she had good hands and better patience. She spoke of the prejudice she faced in most valleys, the suspicion and hostility that greeted her whenever she sought work, the necessity of proving herself twice as skilled to earn half the trust given freely to human craftsmen. Aidan spoke of Margaret, of their 20 years together, of the daughter they had raised and the mill they had maintained, and the comfortable, ordinary life they had built in this valley. He spoke of the hollowness after she died, the way the house became too large and too quiet, the way food tasted like ash and sleep brought only dreams of absence. He spoke of his father and grandfather, of the weight of carrying their legacy, of the shame he felt at being the Sinclair who might finally lose what generations had built. "You did not create the debt," Kara said, her voice gentle but firm. "Marcus Fell created it through deception and exploitation. You are not failing your family by being the victim of a fraud." "I signed the contract," Aidan countered. "I knew the terms, knew I was gambling the mill on the quality of his work. That is my responsibility." Responsibility and blame are not the same thing. She set down her hammer and faced him directly, her amber eyes intense. "You can accept responsibility for the consequences while still acknowledging that you were wronged. Both truths can exist at once." He wanted to believe her, wanted to release the knot of shame and guilt that had been tightening in his chest for months. But shame was a familiar weight, and he had carried it so long he no longer knew how to set it down. The days shortened as autumn deepened toward winter. Frost began appearing on the grass in the mornings, and the trees on the surrounding hills blazed with color before dropping their leaves in golden drifts. Aidan's cooking improved from terrible to merely mediocre to occasionally competent, and Kara praised each small victory with genuine pleasure, as proud of his progress as she was of her stonework. They began eating dinner together every evening, a ritual that felt less like necessity and more like choice, the two of them lingering at the table long after the meal ended, talking about everything and nothing, comfortable in the shared silence when conversation lapsed. Aidan found himself looking forward to these evenings with an intensity that both delighted and frightened him. Found himself watching Kara's face in the lamplight and thinking thoughts. He had no business thinking about a woman who had offered him skilled labor, and nothing more. She seemed unaware of his growing feelings, or perhaps she was simply polite enough to pretend ignorance. She treated him with friendly professionalism, with respect and humor and genuine warmth that never quite crossed the line into flirtation. He was grateful for her restraint even as he wished desperately that she would give him some sign, some indication that she felt even a fraction of what he felt, that he was not alone in this slow, inevitable falling that had ambushed him somewhere between learning to knead dough and rebalancing the upper stone. 6 weeks into her stay, Aidan made bread entirely on his own for the first time. Kara supervised but did not intervene, watching him measure and mix and knead and shape with the intensity of a teacher whose student was attempting something difficult and meaningful. He placed the loaves in the oven with hands that shook slightly, and they waited together in silence for the bread to bake, the kitchen warm and fragrant and alive with possibility. The bread emerged perfect. Not good, not adequate, but genuinely perfect, the crust golden and cracked, the interior soft and properly risen, the taste everything bread should be. Aidan stared at it as though he had conjured something magical, which in a sense he had, and when he looked up, he found Kara smiling at him with such open pride and pleasure that his heart performed acrobatics in his chest. "You did it," she said softly. "We did it," he corrected, because none of his progress had been achieved alone, because everything good in his life for the past 6 weeks had been the result of her patience and skill and willingness to share both. No. She shook her head, still smiling. I taught you the technique, but you did the work. You listened, you practiced, you learned. This is your victory, Aidan Sinclair. He wanted to kiss her. The impulse rose up from somewhere deep and fundamental, overwhelming in its intensity, and he nearly closed the distance between them before sense and propriety reasserted control. Instead, he tore off a piece of the perfect bread and offered it to her, and she took it from his fingers with a touch that lingered just slightly too long to be accidental. And they ate together in the warm kitchen, while the afternoon light painted shadows on the walls. That night, Aidan sat at his desk and reviewed his accounts, calculating income and expenditure with the grim honesty of a man running out of time. The stonework was nearly complete. Another week of fine adjustments and the mill would be ready to run again. If he could get word out immediately, if the quality of the flour was as superior as Kara believed it would be, if enough customers returned quickly enough and paid promptly, then he might, just barely, scrape together enough coin to satisfy Marcus Fell's debt. It would require everything going perfectly. It would require luck he had not possessed in years. It would require a miracle. But miracles, Aidan had learned, sometimes walked through your door uninvited and announced your cooking was terrible. And if one miracle had already occurred, perhaps another was not entirely impossible. He was closing the ledger when Kara appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a shawl against the evening chill, her hair loose around her shoulders. "You are doing accounts," she observed. "I am pretending to do accounts," Aidan corrected. "Mostly I am staring at numbers and willing them to be different numbers. Does that ever work? Not yet, but I remain optimistic." She moved into the room, her bare feet silent on the floorboards, and sat in the chair across from his desk. "Show me." "Show you what?" "The numbers. The debt. Let me see what we are working against." He should have refused, should have maintained the polite fiction that his finances were his business alone, but he was tired of carrying the weight in secret, tired of pretending everything was fine when it manifestly was not. He turned the ledger to face her and watched her face as she reviewed the columns, noting the moment her expression shifted from curiosity to understanding to something that looked like carefully controlled anger. "This is worse than you said." "Yes." "Marcus Fell is charging 23% interest now, compounding weekly. The contract specified that rates could increase if payment was substantially delayed. When does he return? The contract says before the first snow. That gives us perhaps 3 weeks, a month at most." Kara stood and began pacing, her agitation visible in the sharp movements, the way her hands clenched and released at her sides. "Even with perfect stones and immediate custom, you cannot earn this amount in 3 weeks. "No," Aidan agreed quietly, "I cannot. You will lose the mill." "Yes." "And you were simply going to let it happen, without fighting, without trying to negotiate, without seeking help." "I have no grounds for negotiation," Aidan said, his voice steady despite the emotion churning beneath. "And I will not ask others to pay for my mistakes." "I have savings," Kara said abruptly. 2 years of work, careful spending, it is enough to cover the debt." The offer struck him like a physical blow, leaving him breathless with gratitude and horror in equal measure. "No, it is already saved. I am not sacrificing anything current, merely spending future security to solve a present crisis." "No," Aidan repeated more firmly. "I will not take your security. I will not take 2 years of your labor to pay for my failures. It is not your failure. It is Marcus Fell's fraud. It is my signature on the contract." He stood to face her, needing her to understand, needing her to see that he could not, would not, allow her to sacrifice herself for his sake. "Kara," You have been extraordinarily generous already. You have given me 6 weeks of expert labor for nothing but room and board. You have taught me to cook, restored my stones, filled my house with life again after 2 years of emptiness. I cannot ask more. I will not ask more. You are not asking. I am offering. And I am refusing. His voice came out harsher than intended, sharp with the pain of having to reject help he desperately needed, because accepting it would cost someone he cared about more than he could bear. Find someone else to save, Kara. I am not worth 2 years of your life. She recoiled as though he had struck her, her amber eyes wide and wounded. You think I am offering out of pity, out of charity? I think you are offering because you are kind and generous and you cannot stand to watch someone lose everything when you have the power to prevent it. But kindness is not obligation, and I release you from any debt you think you owe me. I do not offer because of debt. Her voice was low, controlled, vibrating with emotion held in check through sheer force of will. I offer because I care about what happens to you, because the thought of Marcus Fell taking this place and destroying what you and your family built makes me want to break things, because I have been here 6 weeks, and I cannot imagine leaving. Cannot imagine you not being in the world making your terrible jokes and burning your bread and smiling like the sun breaking through clouds. The confession hung between them in the lamplight, raw and honest, and terrifying in its vulnerability. Aidan felt his careful control fracturing, felt the walls he had built around his heart developing cracks wide enough to let in dangerous things like hope and wanting. And the acknowledgement that he was not alone in this slow falling they had both been pretending was not happening. Kara, he said helplessly. I know, she replied. I know you are twice my age and I am orc and this valley barely tolerates my presence. I know you still love your wife and probably always will. I know I should keep this professional and simple and uncomplicated. But it is too late for that. It has been too late for weeks, and I cannot watch you lose everything without trying to help, not when I have the means. I am not twice your age, Aidan said, because it was the only thing in her speech he could safely address without completely falling apart. I am 42. You are perhaps 30. That is hardly a scandalous gap. 28, Kara corrected, and you are avoiding the important part. I am avoiding all of it because if I do not avoid it, I will do something unwise. He moved away from her, putting the desk between them like a barrier, needing space to think clearly when clarity was impossible in her presence. I do care for you, more than I should, more than is appropriate given our arrangement. But I will not allow those feelings to manipulate you into sacrificing your security for my benefit. That would be a betrayal of everything you have given me. Let me decide what I sacrifice and for whom, Kara said quietly. I am not a child to be protected from my own choices. I know that. But I am a man who has lost too much already, and I cannot bear the thought of being responsible for you losing something precious as well. If you spend your savings to pay Marcus Fell and things still fail, if the custom does not return or returns too slowly, then you will have given up 2 years of security for nothing. I cannot let you take that risk. It is my risk to take, not when it is my debt. They stood on opposite sides of the room, separated by more than distance, by pride and fear and the stubborn, destructive need to protect each other at the cost of helping each other. Aidan wanted to close the distance, wanted to accept her offer and her feelings and let himself be saved, but shame and responsibility held him fixed in place, unable to move forward or back. I am going to bed, Kara said finally, her voice tired and defeated. We will finish the stones tomorrow. After that, I will decide where I go next. She left without waiting for his response, and Aidan sank into his chair, dropping his head into his flour-dusty hands. He had handled that badly, had let his pride and his fear drive away the one person who had made him feel alive again, who had filled his house and his heart with warmth he had thought lost forever. But what else could he have done? Accept her money and bind her to his failure. Allow her to impoverish herself for his sake, and then watch her resent him when things fell apart anyway. He loved her. The realization came with quiet certainty, settling into his bones like truth. Somewhere between the first terrible dinner and the perfect bread, between learning to knead dough and rebalance stones, he had fallen completely and irrevocably in love with an orc woman who had walked into his life uninvited and refused to leave even when wisdom suggested she should. He loved her competence and her directness, her gentle teaching and her fierce protectiveness, the way she made him laugh and the way she looked at him like he was worth saving. And because he loved her, he could not let her destroy her future to salvage his present. They worked together the next day in painful silence, completing the final adjustments to the millstones with professional efficiency and absolutely no warmth. The stones were perfect now, balanced and true, the furrows deep and precisely aligned, capable of producing flour finer than anything else in the valley. It was a masterwork of the stone cutter's craft, and Aidan could find no joy in it because it had come at the cost of driving away the woman who created it. They tested the mill with a small batch of grain, and the flour that emerged was extraordinary, fine and pure and utterly consistent. Kara examined it with critical focus, testing texture and color and granularity, and finally nodded her satisfaction. "This will bring back your custom," she said, not looking at him. "Spread word immediately. Bring samples to the bakers in the valley. They will see the quality and return." "Thank you," Aidan said quietly, "for everything. I know I cannot repay you for what you have done. The room and board were sufficient payment." Her tone was professionally distant, the warmth of their previous weeks completely absent. "I will stay through the end of the week to ensure the stones are performing consistently. Then I will move on." "Where will you go? South, perhaps. There are always mills needing work, and winter is milder in the southern valleys." She would disappear into the border country, would take her skills and her generosity to some other desperate mill keeper who would appreciate her help and probably fall in love with her just as Aidan had. And he would be left here alone with his perfect stones and his impossible debt and the memory of 6 weeks when his house had felt like a home again. "I wish things were different," he said, the words inadequate but honest. "So do I." She finally looked at him, her amber eyes reflecting grief that mirrored his own, but wishing does not change reality. "You need money I am not allowed to give you, and I need to leave before I do something even more foolish than offering it." She walked away before he could respond, leaving him alone in the mill with the perfect stones that would save nothing. Aidan spent the afternoon visiting every bakery and kitchen in the valley, carrying samples of the new flour and demonstrating its quality to anyone who would listen. The reception was cautiously positive. The flour was indeed superior, noticeably finer and more consistent than what Thornton's mill produced, and several bakers promised to bring their next wheat harvest to be ground. But promises were not coin, and harvest was weeks past, and Aidan could not charge enough per measure to earn Marcus Fell's debt before the man returned to collect. He was carrying his empty sample bag back across the village square when he noticed the crowd gathered near the western road. 20 or so people stood in a loose circle, their attention focused on something at the center, their voices raised in anger and approval. Aidan pushed through to see what warranted such attention and felt his heart sink. Marcus Fell stood in the center of the crowd, tall and broad and professionally intimidating, with 2 hired men flanking him like trained dogs. And facing them, standing with the rigid posture of someone expecting violence, was Kara. "You owe me for the stonework," Marcus was saying, his voice carrying the false reasonableness of men who know the law is on their side. 2 gold crowns plus 8 months of compounding interest. That brings the total to 4 crowns and 6 silver. "Your stonework was fraudulent," Kara replied, her voice steady but tight with controlled fury. "You produced inferior product while claiming expert quality. That is breach of contract. Contract was between me and Sinclair, not between me and some wandering orc." Marcus smiled, the expression containing no warmth or humor. "Though I am curious what you are doing in his house, girl. Seems like a strange arrangement, a widower and an orc woman living together all cozy. People might get ideas." The implication hung in the air like poison, and Aidan felt rage flash through him, so intense it left him shaking. He pushed forward through the crowd, placing himself between Marcus and Kara, facing down the larger man with no plan beyond making him stop talking, making him take back the vile insinuation. "Kara Vorden is a skilled craftswoman who repaired the damage you caused," Aidan said, his voice carrying across the square. "She has been staying as my guest in exchange for her labor, an arrangement that is no one's business but ours." "Your guest," Marcus repeated, his smile widening. "That what they call it in the border valleys? Keeping an orc girl as a guest?" Aidan moved before thought could intervene, his fist connecting with Marcus Fell's jaw with a satisfying crack that sent the larger man staggering back. Pain exploded across Aidan's knuckles, but he ignored it, ignored the gasps from the crowd, ignored Kara's sharp intake of breath, focused only on the rage burning in his chest, the need to make Marcus hurt for what he had said, for what he had implied about Kara, about both of them. Marcus recovered quickly, his smile gone, replaced by cold calculation. "That was a mistake, Sinclair." His hired men moved forward, and Aidan braced for violence he could not hope to win, 2 against 1 with Marcus himself likely to join once his men had softened the target. But before they could reach him, Kara stepped forward, her hand closing on the nearest man's wrist with visible pressure that made him yelp in pain. "Touch him and you will regret it," she said quietly, and something in her voice, some absolute certainty of consequence, made both hired men hesitate. "You threatening us, orc?" Marcus demanded. "I am promising you." She released the hired man's wrist and faced Marcus directly. "You claim Aidan owes you 4 crowns 6 silver. I have that amount. I will pay his debt in full right now and we will be done." "No," Aidan said immediately, reaching for her arm. "Kara, no." She pulled away from his grip, not looking at him, her attention fixed on Marcus Fell. "Do you accept payment or not?" Marcus studied her with the calculating focus of a merchant evaluating merchandise. "I accept payment from the debtor or his legal proxy." "Are you claiming to be Sinclair's proxy?" "I am claiming to pay his debt. Whether I am proxy or simply generous is irrelevant." "Is relevant, actually. Contract law requires debts be satisfied by the debtor or his appointed legal representative. If you are not his representative, then your payment does not satisfy the contract." Marcus was enjoying this. Aidan realized with sick certainty, enjoying the legal trap he had just sprung, the way he could refuse Kara's money and still claim Aidan in default. "Then I appoint her my representative," Aidan said quickly. "Kara Vorden acts with my full legal authority in all matters related to this debt." "Convenient," Marcus said, "and highly suspicious. No, I think I will require payment from Sinclair himself, as specified in the original contract. He has until first snow to deliver 4 crowns 6 silver to me personally, or the mill transfers to my ownership in settlement. Those are the terms we agreed." Those terms assumed your work was competent, Kara snapped. You committed fraud. Prove it. Take it to the valley magistrate, file a complaint, see if a human court listens to an orc's testimony over mine. Marcus gestured to his hired men, and they began moving back toward the road. First snow, Sinclair. I will return to collect what I am owed. And I suggest you find better company to keep in the meantime. People might start thinking you have bad judgment. They departed with the casual arrogance of men who knew the law protected them. And the crowd dispersed with uncomfortable speed, none of them willing to meet Aidan's eyes or acknowledge what they had just witnessed. Within minutes, the square was empty except for Aidan and Kara, standing in the afternoon sun with the weight of their choices settling around them like ash. You should not have hit him, Kara said quietly. He should not have said what he said about you. Words are just words. Now he will use that violence to justify whatever he wants when he takes the mill. I do not care. And Aidan found he meant it, found that the rage had burned away something in him that had been holding him careful and cautious, leaving only clarity. Let him take the mill. Let him take everything. I am not sorry I hit him, and I would do it again. Kara finally looked at him, her amber eyes searching his face. You are a fool, probably. He will use this. He will tell everyone you are unstable, violent, living in sin with an orc woman. He will destroy your reputation along with your livelihood. I have spent 2 years protecting my reputation and my livelihood, and I have lost both anyway, Aidan replied. At least this way I lost them for something that mattered. She made a frustrated sound and began walking toward the house, her stride quick and angry. Aidan followed, cradling his aching hand, replaying the moment his fist connected with Marcus Fell's jaw, and finding he genuinely did not regret it, even though he probably should, even though it had accomplished nothing, except making a bad situation worse. They reached the house, and Kara rounded on him immediately, her fury finally unleashed. You just made it impossible for me to pay your debt. He will not accept my money now specifically because you appointed me your proxy. That was his plan all along, to manipulate you into doing exactly that so he could refuse payment and claim default. Then I am in default, Aidan said simply, and the mill is lost. And I am sorry you wasted your time on stones I will not own long enough to use. You are giving up. I am accepting reality. He moved past her into the kitchen, pumping water to wash the blood from his knuckles. There is no path forward, Kara. I cannot earn his price in 3 weeks. You cannot pay on my behalf. The mill is gone. I knew this was coming, have known it for months. I was just pretending otherwise. She followed him, standing in the kitchen doorway with her arms crossed. So that is it. You surrender. I told you before, I am not surrendering. I am accepting the logical consequence of choices I made. Marcus Fell will take the mill. I will find other work. Life continues. And what about us? The question hung between them, heavy with everything they had been avoiding, everything they had been dancing around for weeks. Aidan turned to face her, leaning back against the basin, his wet hands dripping on the floor. There is no us, he said gently. There is a miller who is about to lose his mill and a stone cutter who generously tried to help him. Anything else is wishful thinking. You are lying. She moved into the kitchen properly, stopping just outside his reach. You care for me. You said as much last night. I do care for you. That is exactly why there cannot be in us. He reached for the cloth to dry his hands, needing something to do with them besides reaching for her. You deserve better than a failed miller with no prospects and a reputation that will be mud once Marcus Fell spreads his version of today's events. You deserve someone who can offer you stability and security, and a future that does not include being linked to valley gossip about what exactly we were doing in this house for 6 weeks. Let me decide what I deserve. I am trying to protect you. I do not need your protection. I need your honesty." She took another step closer, and Aidan felt his careful control slipping, felt the walls he had built crumbling under the weight of her proximity and his exhaustion, and the knowledge that he was losing everything anyway, so why not lose this too? Why not admit the truth and let her reject him properly? "I love you," he said, the words escaping before he could stop them. "I have loved you since you announced my cooking was terrible and took over my kitchen like you owned it. I love your competence and your directness, and the way you look at me like I am worth something despite all evidence to the contrary. I love watching you work, love listening to you teach, love the way this house feels when you are in it. And because I love you, I cannot let you tie yourself to my failure. You have a future, Kara. Do not sacrifice it for my past." She stared at him for a long moment, her expression cycling through emotions too quickly to track. Then she closed the distance between them in 2 quick steps and kissed him. It was not a gentle kiss, not tentative or questioning. It was fierce and claiming, her hands fisting in his shirt, her mouth demanding response rather than requesting it. Aidan froze for half a heartbeat, shock overriding instinct, and then he was kissing her back with 2 years of loneliness and 6 weeks of wanting pouring through him like floodwater breaking a dam. She tasted like stone dust and determination. Her body was solid and strong against his, curves and muscle in equal measure, and when he wrapped his arms around her waist and pulled her closer, she made a small sound of satisfaction that made his heart stumble in his chest. They broke apart eventually, breathing hard, foreheads pressed together in the afternoon light. Aidan's hands were shaking, his pulse racing, his thoughts scrambled beyond coherence. "That was unwise," he managed finally. "Probably," Kara agreed. "Do you regret it?" "Not even slightly." She smiled, fierce and bright, and kissed him again, softer this time, thorough and exploring. Aidan let himself sink into it, let himself have this moment even though it solved nothing, changed nothing, meant he would lose the mill and lose her, and have the memory of this to haunt him for whatever years remained. When they finally separated for air, Kara rested her head against his chest, and he held her carefully as though she might disappear if he gripped too tightly. "I love you too," she said quietly, in case that was not clear. "It was slightly ambiguous," Aidan replied, and felt her laugh against his ribs. "I do not have a plan," she admitted. "I do not know how to fix this. Marcus Fell has outmaneuvered us at every turn, but I am not leaving and I am not letting you face this alone." "You should leave," Aidan said into her hair. "You should go south before the snow comes and find work in valleys that do not know Marcus Fell or care about my failures. I should do many things. I rarely do any of them." She pulled back to look up at him, her amber eyes serious. "I am staying, Aidan. Even if you lose the mill, even if we have to leave this valley entirely and start over somewhere else, I am staying." He wanted to argue, wanted to protect her from the consequences of choosing him, but he was tired and heartsick and she was warm in his arms, and he had already lost so much that losing the argument too seemed inevitable. "Then we find a way forward together," he said. "Whatever that looks like." They spent the evening planning like generals before battle, spreading papers across the table and calculating every possible path to the impossible sum Marcus Fell demanded. The finest flour would bring back custom, but not quickly enough. Aidan could sell his personal possessions, but they amounted to perhaps 3 silver at most. He could borrow from neighbors, but they were farmers with harvest debts of their own, no spare coin to lend even if they were willing to involve themselves in his troubles. What about the magistrate? Kara suggested. If we can prove Marcus Fell's work was fraudulent, the contract might be void. On what evidence? Your professional opinion against his. You said yourself a human court will not favor orc testimony. Aidan rubbed his tired eyes. And even if they did hear the case, we would need time for the process, and time is exactly what we lack. They worked late into the night, exploring and discarding options, until finally exhaustion claimed them both and they admitted defeat, at least for the evening. Aidan walked Kara to her room and kissed her goodnight with desperate tenderness, holding her like she was the only solid thing in a world that had become untethered. "We will find a way," she whispered against his mouth. "I promise." But promises, Aidan knew, could not always be kept, no matter how fiercely they were meant. He dreamed that night of Margaret, of the two of them young and newly married, dancing in the kitchen to music only they could hear. She smiled at him with the warmth that had first captured his heart, and then she leaned close and whispered, "Let her help you, you stubborn fool. That is what love is for." He woke with tears on his face and dawn light painting his window gold. The house was quiet, Kara still asleep down the hall, and Aidan rose to wash and dress with the heavy knowledge that today brought him no closer to solutions, only one day closer to loss. He was in the kitchen making tea, using the skills Kara had taught him, when inspiration struck with the sudden clarity of lightning. The flour was extraordinary, the finest in the valley. But flour sold by the measure brought pennies. Flour transformed into bread, however, into something finished and ready to eat, that sold for significantly more. And bread made with superior flour, baked with proper technique, would be worth even more than common loaves. He could not earn Marcus Fell's debt selling flour. But he might possibly earn it selling bread. Aidan began calculating furiously, figuring the cost of flour and fuel and time against the price bread commanded in the village market. The margins were small but present, and if he worked every waking hour for the next 3 weeks, if he baked and sold bread with the same intensity stone cutters dressed millstones, he might scrape together enough coin to at least negotiate with Marcus Fell. It was desperate and unlikely and would require more luck than skill, but it was a possibility, and possibility was more than he had possessed yesterday. Kara appeared in the kitchen doorway, her hair sleep mussed, wrapped in a shawl against the morning chill. "You are up early." "I have an idea," Aidan said, and explained his plan while she listened with focused attention, her expression shifting from skepticism to consideration to cautious optimism. "It might work," she said finally. "If the bread is extraordinary, if you can produce enough volume. If the market demand exists. Those are significant ifs. They are." She moved to the stove, taking over the tea preparation with automatic competence. "But they are better than no option at all, and I can help. Teach you advanced techniques, help with the actual baking, manage the sales." "You do not need to do this," Aidan said. "You have already given so much." "I am not doing this for you," Kara replied, pouring tea into 2 cups. "I am doing it for us. If you are going to insist on staying in this valley and fighting Marcus Fell, then I am going to insist on helping. We are partners now, whether you accept it or not. Partners." The word settled into Aidan's chest with a warmth that had nothing to do with tea. "Partners," he repeated, testing it, finding it fit better than he had expected. "I can work with that." They spent the morning transforming the kitchen into a small bakery, clearing space and organizing supplies, and planning production with military precision. Kara taught him techniques beyond simple bread, showing him how to make rolls and sweet buns and flatbreads, each with their own requirements and market value. They baked test batches, refining recipes and timing, and by afternoon the kitchen smelled like heaven, yeast and butter and sugar filling the house with comfort. That evening they loaded their first batch of bread into baskets and carried it to the village market, setting up a small stand with samples and prices clearly displayed. The reception was immediate and enthusiastic. People who had never cared about the quality of their flour suddenly cared deeply about the quality of their bread. And Aidan's products, made with the finest flour in the valley and baked with proper technique, were demonstrably superior to anything else available. They sold out in 2 hours. Aidan counted the coins with shaking hands, scarcely believing the total. It was not enough, not nearly enough to pay Marcus Fell, but it was more than he had earned in a month of grinding flour, and there were still 3 weeks before first snow. This might actually work, he said wonderingly. It will work, Kara corrected, her voice firm with certainty. We will make it work. They fell into a brutal routine over the following weeks, up before dawn to start dough rising. Morning spent baking while the previous day's sales cooled. Afternoon, marketing in the village and neighboring settlements. Evening, preparing ingredients and planning the next day's production. They worked themselves to exhaustion, sleeping in short shifts, trading time at the oven and the market stand, moving through the days with focused intensity that left no room for doubt or fear. The coin accumulated slowly, painfully slowly, each day's earnings carefully recorded in Aidan's ledger. 3 silver the first week, 4 silver the second, 5 silver the third, as word spread and demand increased, as people began specifically seeking out Sinclair's bread because it was worth the extra cost, because quality mattered and Aidan's product delivered quality with consistency. But 5 silver was not 4 crowns, and time was running out like sand through spread fingers. 10 days before the deadline, Kara approached Aidan with a proposal that made his chest tighten with fear and hope in equal measure. The autumn festival is in 5 days, she said, referring to the valley's traditional celebration before winter settled in properly. Everyone will be there. Everyone will be celebrating, and they will be willing to pay premium prices for premium goods. If we bring enough bread, enough variety, we could make 2 weeks' earnings in a single day. That would require baking non-stop for 5 days, Aidan said. We would need to produce 3 times our current volume. I know. She met his eyes steadily. But it might be our only chance to earn enough. Are you willing to try? He was. They both were. So they pushed themselves even harder, transforming every available surface into baking space, operating multiple ovens simultaneously, sleeping in 2-hour shifts when they slept at all. The house filled with bread, baskets stacked to the ceiling, the smell of baking so pervasive it soaked into their clothes and hair, until they both smelled like yeast and flour no matter how often they washed. Aidan's hands developed blisters that broke and bled and formed calluses. His back ached from hours bent over the work table. His eyes burned from smoke and exhaustion. But Kara worked beside him through every moment, matching his effort, pushing through her own exhaustion with grim determination, and her presence made the impossible feel merely difficult. They talked while they worked, conversations broken by long silences when concentration demanded it, resuming seamlessly when breath allowed. They talked about the future, about what they would do after this was over, whether they would stay in the valley or move on, whether the house would feel like home with just the 2 of them, or whether they might someday fill it with family again. I always wanted children, Aidan admitted during one late-night baking session, kneading dough while Kara shaped rolls beside him. Margaret and I tried for years before Lily was born, and after her there were no more despite hoping. I thought that door was closed for me. You are only 42, Kara pointed out. That is not old enough. And you are young enough that you should not be thinking about children with a man old enough to be, well, not your father, but your significantly older brother. She made a dismissive sound. Orcs do not measure compatibility by counting years. We measure it by character and intent and whether someone makes us laugh when the world is difficult. You have all three. You make it sound simple. It is simple. Love is simple. Circumstances are complicated, but love itself is straightforward. She glanced at him, flour dusting her cheek like powder. Do you love me? Yes. Do I love you? I believe so. Then everything else is just details to work out. Children or no children, this valley or some other, working together or working separately, those are all negotiable. The love part is fixed. Aidan set aside his dough and moved to cup her flour-dusted face in his hands, kissing her with exhausted tenderness. When this is over, he said against her mouth, when we have dealt with Marcus Fell and the debt and whatever comes next, I would very much like to court you properly. With flowers and dinner, and all the traditional gestures people are supposed to make when they are trying to convince someone to spend their life with them. I am already convinced, Kara replied, smiling, but I will accept the flowers anyway. The festival dawned bright and cold, the sky hard blue and cloudless, perfect weather for celebration. Aidan and Kara loaded their cart with every loaf and roll and bun they had produced over 5 days of desperate labor, carefully packed and covered against the autumn chill. The cart was so heavily loaded, it required both of them to pull it, their breath steaming in the cold air as they made their way to the village square where the festival would be held. They set up their stand in a prime location, displaying their goods with care, pricing everything at the high end of reasonable, gambling that quality would justify cost. Other vendors set up around them, farmers selling last vegetables, craftsmen displaying wares, the blacksmith offering tools and implements. The square filled with people as the morning progressed, the valley's entire population seemingly turning out to celebrate the harvest and enjoy the rare day of leisure before winter's work began. Aidan's bread drew immediate attention, people clustering around to examine and sample and exclaim over the quality. They sold quickly, faster than he had dared hope, coins accumulating in their strongbox with satisfying weight. Kara managed the transactions with brisk efficiency, while Aidan handled the samples and answered questions. And they moved together with the synchronized precision of people who had learned to anticipate each other's needs. By midday, they had sold half their stock and earned more than a crown in coin. By mid-afternoon, 3/4 were gone and the strongbox held a crown and a half. Aidan began to let himself hope, began to believe that perhaps they would actually do this, would earn enough to at least negotiate with Marcus Fell from a position of strength, rather than absolute desperation. And then Marcus Fell arrived. He appeared at the edge of the square with his 2 hired men, surveying the festival with the proprietary air of someone who viewed the valley and everyone in it as potential assets to be acquired. His gaze found Aidan's stand immediately, took in the depleted inventory and the strongbox and the crowd still gathered to purchase, and something calculating moved across his face. He approached slowly, letting people part before him, projecting confidence and authority. When he reached the stand, he smiled the smile of a predator that had cornered its prey. "Sinclair," he said cordially, "I see you have found alternate employment, baking bread rather than grinding flour. Is this admission the mill is already lost?" "This is acknowledgement that bread earns better than flour," Aidan replied evenly, not rising to the bait. "And I am still grinding flour, just using it myself rather than selling it raw." "Clever," Marcus allowed. He picked up one of the remaining rolls, examining it with exaggerated interest. "And using the orc girl to help, I see. Quite the partnership you have developed." "Kara is a skilled baker," Aidan said, his voice taking on an edge despite his attempt to remain calm. "Among her many other talents. I am sure she is talented at many things." The implication was clear and vile, and Aidan felt his hands clenching into fists, despite knowing violence would only make things worse. Kara placed a hand on his arm, a gentle warning to stay controlled. "Do you intend to purchase bread, or simply insult honest work?" she asked Marcus flatly. "I intend to collect what is owed to me," Marcus replied. "First snow is in 10 days, Sinclair. The deadline stands. 4 crowns 6 silver or the mill transfers to my ownership. Your bread baking will not change that." "I am aware of the deadline," Aidan said, "and I will meet it." Marcus's smile widened. "Will you? Let me see." He gestured to the strongbox. "How much have you earned today?" "That is none of your concern." "Actually, it is entirely my concern, since any assets you possess are potentially assets that should be used to satisfy your debt to me." Marcus reached for the strongbox, and Aidan moved to block him, his body between Marcus and the coin they had worked themselves nearly to death to earn. "Do not touch that. Or what? You will strike me again, in front of the entire valley." Marcus gestured to the crowd that had gathered to watch the confrontation. Dozens of faces turned toward them with expressions ranging from concern to anticipation. "Go ahead, Sinclair. Show everyone what kind of man you really are." It was a trap, obvious and unavoidable. If Aidan did nothing, Marcus would take the strongbox and likely claim its contents as partial payment, leaving them with nothing to show for 5 days of brutal labor. If Aidan resisted physically, Marcus would use it to prove he was violent and unstable, strengthening his legal case and destroying Aidan's reputation completely. Kara stepped forward before Aidan could make the choice, placing herself between both men with the strongbox behind her. "The coin is ours, earned through legal trade. You have no right to it until the debt comes due. Leave now, or I will summon the magistrate to explain your attempted theft." Marcus laughed, genuinely amused. "You will summon the magistrate? You, an orc with no legal standing in this valley?" "That is precious. I have exactly as much legal standing as any craftsperson conducting trade," Kara replied, her voice level but carrying an undercurrent of steel. "And witnesses here will confirm you attempted to seize property that does not belong to you. That is theft, regardless of any debt Aidan may owe." The crowd murmured, some voices raised in agreement. Marcus looked around, assessing the mood, clearly calculating whether pressing the confrontation was worth the political cost. Finally, he stepped back, his smile never wavering. "Keep your bread money, Sinclair. It will not be enough anyway. 10 days. If you cannot deliver full payment, I will be back with the magistrate and the paperwork to transfer the deed. Enjoy your festival." He departed with his men, leaving behind a crowd that slowly dispersed, uncomfortable with the conflict and eager to return to celebration. Aidan released a breath he had not realized he was holding, his hands shaking with unspent adrenaline. "That was close," he said quietly. "Too close," Kara agreed. "He will not give up. Even if we earn enough, he will find some way to claim the payment is invalid or insufficient." "Then we need to earn more than enough," Aidan said. "Enough that there is no room for interpretation or legal maneuvering. Enough that even Marcus Fell cannot argue the debt is unsatisfied." They returned to their sales with renewed intensity, pushing through exhaustion and fear, and by the time the festival ended at sunset, they had sold every loaf, every roll, every scrap of bread they had brought. The strongbox held 2 crowns and 3 silver, more than they had dared hope for, more than seemed possible from a single day's work. It was not enough. They still needed 2 crowns 3 silver more, and they had 10 days to earn it. They baked through the night, preparing inventory for the next day's sales, their movements mechanical with exhaustion, sustained by determination alone. Aidan's vision blurred with tiredness, his hands moving on instinct muscle memory guiding him through tasks his conscious mind could barely track. "We should rest," Kara said around midnight, her voice rough with fatigue. "We are no good to anyone if we collapse." "We rest after," Aidan replied, shaping another loaf. "We can rest when Marcus Fell is paid and the mill is secure." "Aidan." She stopped his hands with hers, stilling their motion. "We will not win this by destroying ourselves. Rest for 4 hours. Let your body recover. Then we start again." He wanted to argue, wanted to push through because stopping felt like surrender, but he looked at Kara's face in the lamplight, saw the exhaustion etched around her eyes, and realized she was right. They had 10 days. They needed to pace themselves, or they would fail through collapse rather than lack of effort. They slept together in Aidan's bed, too tired for anything but holding each other, drawing comfort from shared warmth and presence. Aidan woke 4 hours later to find Kara already up, the smell of baking drifting up from the kitchen. He joined her to find she had already started the morning's first batch, working with the quiet efficiency of someone who had woken before him and decided to let him sleep a few extra minutes. "You should have woken me," he said, moving to help. "You needed the rest, and I needed to think." She did not look at him, her attention on the dough she was kneading. "I have been calculating. Even if we sell every day at festival volumes, we will still come up short. Not by much, perhaps a crown, but enough that Marcus Fell can claim default. Then we find a way to make up the difference." "How?" "We are already working every possible hour, selling at maximum price the market will bear. There are no more efficiencies to find, no more tricks to employ. We are running out of time and options." She was right, and Aidan knew it, but he refused to accept it, refused to surrender when they had come so far and fought so hard. "Then we go to the magistrate ourselves. We file complaint about Marcus Fell's fraudulent work, force him to defend his reputation." "With what evidence?" "Your word against his. My professional opinion, which a human court may dismiss." "With the stones themselves." "We bring the magistrate to examine them, show him the poor workmanship Marcus claimed was expert quality." Kara paused in her kneading, considering. "That might work. If the magistrate is knowledgeable about millstones, if he can see the flaws, if he rules the contract is void due to fraud." "Those are many ifs." "Everything is ifs," Aidan replied, "but doing nothing guarantees failure. At least this gives us a chance." They finished the morning baking in thoughtful silence, then loaded a cart with bread for the day's sales. Aidan left Kara to manage the market stand while he went to seek the magistrate, a man named Edmund Carr who served the valley in matters of law and local governance. He found the magistrate at his home on the village edge, a neat cottage with a well-maintained garden and an air of orderly prosperity. Edmund Carr was a man in his 60s, thin and sharp-eyed, with the careful neutrality of someone who had learned to judge disputes without making enemies. He listened to Aidan's complaint with focused attention, taking notes on a small ledger, asking occasional clarifying questions. "You claim Marcus Fell performed substandard work after promising expert quality," Edmund summarized when Aidan finished. "And you want me to examine the stones to verify this claim?" "Yes, the evidence is there in the work itself. Any skilled stone cutter could see it." "I am not a skilled stone cutter," Edmund said mildly. "I am a magistrate. I can assess legal questions, but technical matters of millstone quality are beyond my expertise." "Then bring someone who does have expertise. Bring another stone cutter to examine the work and provide professional opinion." "That would require finding such a person, transporting them here, compensating them for their time and opinion. Do you have resources for such an undertaking? Aidan felt hope crumbling like poorly made bread. I have very limited resources currently. That is rather the point of the dispute. Edmund sighed, setting aside his notes. I understand your situation, Sinclair, and I am sympathetic, but the law requires evidence, not merely accusation. Marcus Fell has a signed contract specifying the debt you owe. Unless you can prove the contract is invalid through clear evidence of fraud, I cannot intervene. My hands are tied. So he can commit fraud with impunity as long as his victims lack resources to prove it. That is not what I said, but proving fraud requires more than claiming the work was poor. It requires demonstrating intentional deception, which is a high legal bar. Edmund leaned forward, his expression gentling slightly. My advice, and I give this as a neighbor rather than as magistrate, is to pay the debt if at all possible. Marcus Fell is known for aggressive collection practices. If you default, he will take the mill, and there will be nothing I can do to prevent it. Aidan departed feeling hollower than when he arrived, the last hope of legal remedy crumbling to dust. He returned to the market stand where Kara was managing a steady stream of customers, and the look on his face apparently told her everything she needed to know. The magistrate will not help, she said, not quite a question. He cannot help. Not without evidence we cannot provide. Aidan sank onto the bench beside the stand, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. We are back to earning it coin by coin. They worked through the following days with grim determination, baking and selling with every ounce of energy they possessed. The coin accumulated with agonizing slowness, each day's earnings carefully recorded, each calculation showing them still short of the necessary total. 3 crowns. 3 crowns 2 silver. 3 crowns 4 silver. The numbers climbed, but too slowly, always too slowly, time racing ahead of their efforts. 5 days before the deadline, Aidan counted their total savings and wanted to weep. 3 crowns 9 silver. They needed 4 crowns 6 silver. 3 days of earnings compressed into 5 days of time, while simultaneously managing all the baking and selling their current earnings required. We are not going to make it, he said quietly, the admission tasting like ash. Kara took the ledger from his hands and studied the numbers with fierce concentration. We need 9 silver more. If we sell every day at festival volumes, we might earn it, just barely. We cannot produce festival volumes every day. We do not have enough hours or enough strength. Then we find help. We hire someone to assist with the baking, expand our capacity. With what money? Every coin we have goes toward the debt. Then we trade. Offer bread in exchange for labor. Half the valley knows we make the finest bread available. Someone will work for payment in kind. It was desperate and unlikely, but it was something, and something was better than surrender. They spent the evening visiting neighbors, offering bread in exchange for baking assistance, and found 3 women willing to help, village wives who had baking skills and afternoon hours to spare. It was not ideal. Training them to Kara's standards required time they did not have. But it expanded their capacity enough that perhaps, they could produce the volume necessary to earn those final crucial silvers. The final 5 days blurred together into exhaustion and flour dust, and the constant smell of baking bread. Aidan lost track of time, of days and nights, measuring his life in batches baked and loaves sold rather than hours passed. His hands developed new calluses over old blisters. His back ached constantly. His eyes burned and his lungs rasped from breathing flour dust and oven smoke. But the coin accumulated. Slowly, painfully, it grew toward the impossible target. 4 crowns. 4 crowns 2 silver. 4 crowns 4 silver. The day before the deadline, they counted their total savings with shaking hands. 4 crowns 5 silver, 1 silver short. Aidan stared at the coins spread across his kitchen table and felt something break inside him. They had worked themselves nearly to death. They had done everything possible, found every efficiency, sold at maximum capacity. And it was not enough. They were 1 silver short, and Marcus Fell would claim that single silver as proof of default, and the mill would be lost. "I am sorry," he said to Kara, who sat across from him with exhaustion etched deep in her face. "I am so sorry. You worked so hard and it was not enough." "We worked hard," she corrected gently. "We did this together, and it is not over yet. We have no more time. Marcus Fell arrives tomorrow morning. We are 1 silver short." Kara reached into her pocket and pulled out a single silver coin, setting it on the table beside their combined savings. "We are exactly enough," she said. Aidan stared at the coin, then at her. "Where did that come from?" "I kept 1 silver back from my personal savings, in case we needed it for exactly this situation. You said you offered all your savings to pay the debt." "I offered to pay the debt. I did not specify I was offering every coin I possessed." She smiled tiredly. "I am not a fool, Aidan. I know better than to put everything into a single gamble. I kept emergency funds back. This qualifies as an emergency." He should have felt relief, should have been grateful, but instead he felt a fresh wave of shame that she had needed to save him yet again, that he had required her resources to cover his failures. She must have seen it in his face, because she reached across the table to grip his hand firmly. "Do not do that. Do not turn this into more evidence of your inadequacy. We are partners. Partners share resources and cover each other's gaps. This is not charity or rescue. This is investment in our combined future." "Our future," Aidan repeated, testing the phrase, finding it both terrifying and wonderful. "Yes, our future. The one where we keep the mill and build a life together and maybe someday have those children you mentioned." She squeezed his hand. "Unless you have changed your mind about wanting that." "No," he said quickly. "No, I want that very much." "Then accept the silver, pay the debt, and let us move forward." They sat together in the lamplight, holding hands across the table scattered with coins that represented weeks of desperate labor, and Aidan allowed himself to feel something he had not felt in months. Certainty. Not certainty that everything would work perfectly. Not certainty that the future would be easy, but certainty that whatever came next, they would face it together, and that made all the difference. Marcus Fell arrived the next morning with his 2 hired men and the magistrate in tow, clearly expecting to find Aidan unable to pay, and prepared to begin immediate foreclosure proceedings. His expression when Aidan met him at the door with a leather bag containing exactly 4 crowns 6 silver was almost worth the weeks of agony that had preceded it. "Full payment," Aidan said, placing the bag in Marcus's hands. 4 crowns 6 silver, as specified in the contract. "The debt is satisfied." Marcus opened the bag and counted the coins twice, slowly, clearly hoping to find some discrepancy that would give him grounds to claim default. But the count was exact, the coins legitimate, and even he could not argue with perfect fulfillment of the contract terms. "This is unexpected," Marcus said finally, his smile strained. "I underestimated your resourcefulness, Sinclair." "You underestimated several things," Kara said, emerging from the house to stand beside Aidan, "including the consequences of doing shoddy work and expecting no one to notice." Marcus turned his smile on her, and it had edges like broken glass. "The Orc girl speaks. Tell me, did you contribute to Sinclair's sudden windfall? Perhaps your savings proved useful after all." "I contributed my skills and my labor," Kara replied evenly. "As did Aidan. We earned this payment through honest work. which is more than can be said for how you conduct business. Careful, girl. Accusing a craftsman of poor work is slander unless you can prove it. Then examine the stones yourself, Marcus fell. Show the magistrate your expert work. Let us see if it meets the standards you claimed in your contract. Marcus's expression darkened, but the magistrate was already moving toward the mill, clearly interested in resolving the implicit accusation. The group followed, Marcus's 2 hired men trailing behind like uncertain dogs. In the mill, Kara climbed to examine the upper stone with Edmund Carr watching from below. She called out technical observations, pointing to furrows and lands and balance points, and while the magistrate clearly did not fully understand the details, Marcus's increasingly defensive responses told their own story. Your work was adequate but not expert, Kara concluded, climbing down to face Marcus directly. You charged premium rates for mediocre service, which could arguably be considered fraud. But Aidan has chosen to pay your debt in full rather than pursue legal action. I suggest you accept the payment, provide a receipt confirming the debt is satisfied, and leave this valley before people start asking too many questions about your other jobs. It was a brilliant move, giving Marcus a graceful exit while simultaneously threatening exposure if he pushed further. The magistrate was watching Marcus with new interest, clearly considering whether to investigate the fraud accusations independently, and Marcus saw the trap closing. The debt is satisfied, Marcus said shortly. He produced a prepared document from his coat and scratched out a receipt confirming full payment and releasing all claims on the mill. He thrust it at Aidan with barely contained fury. Our business is concluded. He departed with his men, and Edmund Carr stayed behind to examine the receipt and ensure its legal sufficiency. When he was satisfied, he shook Aidan's hand with genuine warmth. Congratulations on keeping your mill, Sinclair, and my compliments to you, Miss Vorden, on some clever maneuvering. Marcus Fell will think twice before conducting business in this valley again. He glanced between them with a small smile. I assume you two will be making your arrangement permanent at some point. That is the plan, Aidan confirmed, looking at Kara, who nodded with a smile that made his heart light. Then let me be the first to offer congratulations on that as well. The valley could use more examples of partnership that crosses old boundaries. Edmund departed with a final nod, leaving Aidan and Kara alone in the mill that was now secure, now truly theirs. Aidan pulled Kara into his arms and held her tightly, breathing in the scent of flour and stone dust and her own particular warmth, feeling the tension of weeks draining away like water. We did it, he whispered into her hair. We did, she agreed, holding him just as tightly. Together. They stood in the mill for a long moment, simply holding each other, and then Kara pulled back to look up at him with a mischievous expression. So about those proper courting gestures you mentioned. When do I get my flowers? Aidan laughed, bright and free, the sound echoing in the mill's rafters. Right now, if you want, though it is late autumn, so the flowers may be somewhat pathetic. I will accept pathetic flowers, Kara said solemnly, as long as they come with proper intent. They walked back to the house hand in hand, and Aidan gathered the last of the season's wildflowers from the garden, scraggly and frost-touched but colorful enough. He presented them with exaggerated formality, and Kara accepted with equal ceremony, and they both dissolved into laughter at the absurdity of courting rituals when they had already been living together for months and had saved a mill through combined effort. But the flowers mattered anyway, because they represented choice rather than circumstance, intention rather than necessity. They represented Aidan claiming what he wanted rather than accepting what survival required. And that felt important, felt like the beginning of something rather than just the continuation of what had been. That night they cooked dinner together, a proper meal using all the techniques Kara had taught, and they ate at the table that had hosted Aidan's terrible harvest dinner months ago, and the transformation felt complete. The house was alive again, warm with presence and purpose, filled with the sounds of two people who had found each other through desperation and chosen to stay through love. "What happens now?" Kara asked as they cleaned dishes together, her shoulder brushing his in the comfortable intimacy of shared work. "Now we run the mill properly," Aidan replied. "We grind the finest flour in the valley and sell it at fair price and build a reputation for quality that brings custom without needing desperate bread-baking marathons." And she was smiling, clearly expecting more. "And we get married, if you will have me." Properly married, with the magistrate officiating and the valley bearing witness. He turned to face her fully, taking her flour-dusted hands in his. "I am not wealthy and I am not young, and I come with a mill that needs constant work and a reputation that has been recently tested. But I love you, Kara Vorden, and I want to build a life with you, whatever that life looks like." "That is a terrible proposal," Kara said, but her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You are supposed to promise me the moon and stars, not remind me of all your flaws." "I am promising you honesty and partnership, and a man who will burn dinner sometimes but will always try his best." He pulled her closer. "Is that enough?" "It is more than enough," she whispered, and kissed him with salt on her lips from the tears she was not quite crying. "Yes, I will marry you, you foolish, wonderful man." They married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at the village church, with Edmund Carr officiating and half the valley attending despite whatever reservations they might harbor about human orc unions. Aidan's daughter Lily traveled from the southern valleys with her husband and young son, and she embraced Kara with genuine warmth, delighted that her father had found happiness again after so long alone. The ceremony was simple and brief. Traditional vows exchanged with steady voices and hands that barely shook. When Edmund pronounced them married, and Aidan kissed his wife for the first time in that capacity, the gathered crowd erupted in genuine applause, and Aidan felt something settle in his chest that had been restless since Margaret died. A sense of rightness and home that had nothing to do with buildings and everything to do with the woman now smiling at him with flour permanently embedded under her fingernails, and love written clear across her face. They held the wedding feast at the mill, tables set up in the great room where Kara had first declared his cooking terrible, and the food was exceptional because Kara had supervised its preparation with the same intensity she brought to everything. People ate and drank and danced to music provided by the village's handful of musicians, and Aidan danced with his new wife in the space between tables, holding her close while the lamplight painted everything gold. "Your cooking has improved," Kara observed as they swayed together. "I had an excellent teacher," Aidan replied, though she was rather harsh in her initial assessment. "Honesty is important in any relationship." She leaned her head against his chest. "I told you your cooking was terrible. You told me your mill was failing. We built something real from those truths." "We did," he agreed, resting his cheek against her hair. "Thank you for staying. Thank you for letting me." The seasons turned as seasons do, autumn giving way to winter, giving way to spring. The mill thrived under their combined management, producing flour of such consistent quality that custom not only returned, but expanded. People traveling from neighboring valleys specifically to have their grain ground at Sinclair's mill. The bread baking became a supplementary business rather than a desperate necessity. Kara teaching several village women her techniques and managing a small bakery cooperative that provided income for multiple families. They settled into married life with the ease of people who had already weathered the worst of what life could throw at them, and found each other sufficient to face whatever came next. Aidan learned to read Kara's moods, to know when she needed space to work alone on some intricate stone cutting project, and when she needed company and conversation. Kara learned Aidan's rhythms, learned that his easy humor sometimes masked genuine worry, learned to draw out his concerns before they festered into the kind of silent burden he had carried with Marcus Fell's debt. They argued occasionally about methods and priorities, and whether the new millstone needed replacing now or could wait another season. But their arguments were brief and honest, ending with compromise or capitulation depending on who held the stronger position. They were partners in the truest sense, sharing labor and decision-making equally, and the valley adjusted to seeing them as a unit, Sinclair and Vorden, the miller and the stone cutter who had somehow made an impossible situation work. The prejudice against orcs did not disappear, but it softened, at least in their valley. Children who had been taught to fear orcs watched Kara working at the mill, watched her teaching and laughing and being genuinely kind to everyone she encountered, and learned perhaps that the old stories were not always true, that monsters were made not born, that difference was not the same as danger. A year after their marriage, Kara missed her monthly bleeding and announced with cautious joy that she believed she was pregnant. Aidan received the news with terror and delight in equal measure, memories of Margaret's difficult pregnancy with Lily warring with hope that this time would be different, this time would be healthy and safe. The pregnancy progressed with remarkable ease, Kara remaining active and energetic even as her belly swelled, continuing to work in the mill until the final month when even her stubbornness had to admit that climbing ladders to examine millstones was perhaps unwise. Aidan fussed over her with anxious care, and she tolerated it with good-humored patience, secure in the knowledge that his worry came from love rather than any belief she was fragile. Their son was born on a warm spring evening, arriving quickly and with minimal complication, as though he was in a hurry to meet the world that awaited him. They named him Aaron, and he had his mother's green-tinted skin and small tusks that would grow more prominent with age, and his father's gray eyes and easy smile. Lily traveled north to meet her half-brother and declared him perfect, and Aidan held his son in flour-dusted hands and marveled that life had given him this second chance at fatherhood, this unexpected gift. Aaron was 6 months old when Kara announced she was pregnant again, and this time, Aidan accepted the news with more confidence and less terror, trusting that their family was meant to grow, that their house was meant to be filled with children who would learn to grind flour and cut stone and make bread that did not taste like charcoal. Their second son, Tobias, arrived the following spring, and he looked more human than orc, with only the faintest green tinge to his skin and small, almost invisible tusks. The valley accepted both children with warmth that would have been unthinkable 5 years prior, and Aidan watched his sons grow with gratitude that bordered on wonder. The years passed in the rhythm of mill work and child rearing, seasons marked by harvest and grinding and the slow, steady accumulation of small joys. The mill prospered. The children grew healthy and strong. Kara's stone-cutting reputation spread beyond the valley, bringing commission work from distant mills, and she trained apprentices who carried her techniques to other border settlements. Aidan's cooking never became exceptional, but it became consistently competent, good enough that he could feed his family without disaster and occasionally surprise Kara with a meal that earned genuine praise. They worked side by side for 20 more years, maintaining the mill and raising their sons and building a life that felt both ordinary and miraculous, mundane in its daily rhythms and extraordinary in its defiance of what either of them had thought possible. When Aidan was 65 and Kara was 51, they stood together at the mill wheel watching their grandchildren play in the stream that powered the machinery, Aaron's daughter and Tobias's twin sons, 3 children who carried human and orc blood in equal measure and thought nothing of it, to whom the idea that their grandmother's green skin and tusks made her different or dangerous was as foreign as suggesting water should not be wet. "We built something good here," Kara said, leaning against Aidan's shoulder with the comfortable weight of decades together. "We did," he agreed, wrapping an arm around her waist. "Thank you for announcing my cooking was terrible and refusing to leave." She laughed, the sound as bright as it had been 20 years prior when she first smiled at his self-deprecating jokes. "Thank you for letting me take over your kitchen." They stood together watching their grandchildren play, watching the mill wheel turn in the eternal rhythm of water and stone. And Aidan reflected that he had lost everything once and found it again transformed, that his greatest failure had led to his greatest fortune, that sometimes salvation arrived uninvited and announced itself with brutal honesty about your cooking skills. The afternoon sun painted everything gold, and the mill wheel turned, and somewhere in the house bread was rising that Aidan would probably slightly overbake, but Kara would eat anyway. And life was exactly as it should be, ordinary and extraordinary, and built from the determination of 2 people who had refused to give up on each other or themselves. They went inside as the sun set, hand in hand, flour dusted and content, to check on the bread and prepare dinner and live the life they had built together, 1 meal and 1 stone and 1 day at a time.